might give us a few thousand PDFs, Excel files, docs, and then we have to figure out what all this really means. And that's in the title when I say PDF ghetto, that is a phrase that USAID uses for their own project document management system. They call it a PDF ghetto. It's just a huge pile of PDFs. No one knows what's in them. A ton of them aren't even searchable. Like you couldn't do Control F because it's just a photo. And we'll see an example of that. So we have many sources. One is documents. But we also have these other three. OECD CRS, I've been talking about the OECD a lot. The CRS is their creditor reporting system. This is the OECD's official list of the aid that the richest countries in the world give to the rest of the world. This is their official list. That's one of our sources. IATI is another source, the International Aid Transparency Initiative. So we've been talking about aid transparency. It's been important enough that this big global initiative has been founded to get people together to agree on standards on how to record data about development finance. So that's one of our sources. And aid management platforms, which are country by country, are another source. And these sources are all different, and they attempt frequently to record the same information, which is one of our biggest challenges. So the creditor reporting system has about 2.3 million records from 79 to 2011. They just published 2012 and maybe 2013, but we haven't started looking at those yet. We're about to incorporate them. So they publish rarely, and they have tons of records, but what they consider a record is not necessarily considered a record by someone else. So we have this hierarchical concept of aid projects, which have below them transactions. So the CRS may say, this is a project, and the World Bank, who's being recorded, will say that wasn't a project, that was a transaction in a project. So that creates further confusion. Oh, and I haven't looked at data pre-1995 enough, but everyone says don't trust anything that was published before 1995. It's worthless, basically. Which is very, I wonder about that. But one of the peculiarities of the CRS is that to appease their member countries, it's a perfectly legitimate perspective, but their perspective is, we are a partnership of many countries. It's very important to us to keep every participant happy. So they'll do things like if your country graduates from being middle income to upper income, they erase the records of you ever receiving aid. It just goes away. So there are changes in records over time. The International Aid Transparency Initiative, these records are contributed donor by donor if they decide to sign up. So this got big last year, and everybody's starting to sign up. Some people are really on board, like the UK, and others are way behind. And some people have no interest in publishing their activities. Aid management platforms are available country by country. They're databases of aid that are typically handled by the Ministry of Finance in that country, like Uganda, Timor-Leste, Nepal. And it's our partner NGO, Development Gateway in DC, which is a spin-off of the World Bank, which makes these databases for recipient countries. But once the recipient country has them, they do pretty much whatever they want, which is really problematic for us because we're trying to make everything line up and work together and remove duplicates and stuff like that. But we also get some rich information from the recipient that we would have never heard of from the donor, for example. Now, when it comes to documents, the World Bank alone has 156 document types. They have 156 different kinds of documents. So a given project may have 3 documents of one type, 6 of another, or 11 of another, but then each of those may have a few other projects they're also talking about. So this is, in fact, from the perspective of automation and what would the role of topic modeling be, for example, is, I would say, an extremely difficult problem. So problems with input aid documents. Documents may be missing or withheld by many donors. Saudi Arabia and China are, in the eyes of many Western countries, notorious cases. But nothing really bad happened. When we published that disaggregated China data, no one in China seemed to be upset about it. they were perfectly fine, which is good. So our relationship with these recipient countries and donor countries is always improving. And so much about this work is the relationship with ministers, for example. So continuing problems with documents, they might need, who knows about optical character recognition? Okay, so imagine you, Google Books, you know about Google Books, right? So I'll only make the smallest comment on this issue. That is one of the largest, if not the largest, thefts of intellectual property in the history of the world, Google Books. They scanned 15 million books, and only 5 million of those were public domain, and they didn't ask permission for the rest. And they had some court cases to settle the fact that they'd stolen all this property, and it came out to, from their perspective, almost no money, like a couple $100 million or something, which they don't care about. But anyway, they had to use a ton of optical character recognition so that those books could be text searchable, so that they could be, from a computer's perspective, strings of text, which could be manipulated. Otherwise you literally can't do Control F. It's just a photograph, scanned image. So that's optical character recognition. That's when a piece of software tries to guess what letter or character it's looking at. It's extremely difficult. It has to be done totally differently for something like Arabic than English or German. Most of the work is in the Roman alphabet. Yeah, we have many languages to deal with as well. A major issue is that we have tons of inputs that are in Spanish, French, Portuguese, German. Those are the big ones. But in our work with Chinese projects, for instance, we have many inputs which are in Chinese. So, dealing with that is an added challenge. A huge portion of entities, like organization names, dates, amounts of money, are not of interest to us at all. And that's the main challenge with identifying entities. So if you could find in this document what are all the years, the next problem is, which years do I actually care about? There might be tons of years and dates in a document which are not really of interest to us. What we're most interested in is, when did the project start? When did it end? When was the document signed that said it would happen? Things like that. There are problems with official published records of aid. So aid documents, that's just messy piles of inputs. But there are these official records like the OECD CRS and the IATI registry, and they have an enormous problem with double counting. So there are multiple efforts to record what what most donors are giving and what most countries are getting. And the World Bank records for itself, then it might publish a subset of that to the IATI registry, and the CRS asks for it, and it gets incredibly complicated. The CRS, by the way, is pretty much, from my understanding, every country, every DAC country, the biggest donors, has a person whose job it is to make an Excel spreadsheet for the OECD, and then they put them all together. But they record them differently. Every country thinks, let's talk about these issues. Donors record identical contributions in different ways. And that changes over time as well. So I'm not nearly as knowledgeable about this topic as some people are. But we've had people explain that the Dutch aid agency used to record the date of its commitment funding this way, but then they changed. But then this other country doesn't do it that way. So that's incredibly confusing. When I was talking about how in the CRS there are changes, so you can have a record in 1995. When the CRS is published in 97, that record looks one way. When it's published in 2000, the same record looks a different way. When it's published in 2007, the same record looks yet a different way. And the OECD has frowned on us we were interested in just playing around with the idea of publishing all the different versions of their data that we've gathered over the years, and they're not happy about that idea. They have an official database, and that's what goes. Non-DAC donors, so those countries which are not the top donors, the traditional donors, are typically not officially recorded. So they may have an excellent database in their own Ministry of Finance, They may know everything about their own operations, but they might not share. This is a map of these DAC countries I've been talking about. If you're curious about this spot, that's because it belongs to France. I don't know, just to throw in a historical comment, most colonial powers still have holdings, like the US owns Puerto Rico, for example, Guam. Everybody still owns stuff. The British have the Falkland Islands, stuff like that. But, so these are the top donors, the traditional donors. But if you're not one of these, you're not being officially entered. So, some example inputs. The PDF ghetto. What do the contents of the PDF ghetto look like? They look atrocious. I'm going to try to zoom in on this. So, this piece of paper looks like it was sort of mashed up before it was scanned. And the result, you guys know about CAPTCHA, right? Like you go to a website and it says, prove that you're a human being by typing in what these letters are. That system, reCAPTCHA, was actually invented to harvest your entries. So it generates something that it knows about. So it says, takes the word draw, and then it mangles it and asks you to prove you're a human by typing that. But then it will give you a different word, which it's trying to do OCR on. And that's like a human-based system for having machines learn what text might look like. So, and that's a huge problem when letters are, this is the word farmers, but it's crushed. Things are skewing off at an angle. OCR is typically hoping that text is flat. We have letters bulging. Basically, it's a huge disaster. This doesn't always happen. This is a really bad example. But this sort of thing might happen. And the output is you could do OCR, and then you could probably get this. And stuff like, it would say overall objective, specific strategic objectives, right? You get a lot of headers, very crisp, but that's not very important. You're not really interested in the headers. So that's one kind of challenge. We get a ton of docs, like Microsoft Office docs, which is fine because there's plenty of automatic ways to convert anything to text easily except stuff that needs OCR. But you look at this is examples of entities that we probably don't care about. So these are place names in Malawi. So government stakeholders in these places have been consulted. If you said pull out place names on this document, it would say, okay, Zomba, Lilongwe, Blantyre, and then you would think, did the project happen there? I don't know. If you read the sentence, government stakeholders were consulted. That doesn't mean the project took place in those places. Actually the most common locations that documents talk about are DC and European capitals. They consistently talk about the capitals of the donor countries, probably as a stand-in for talking about that donor. You know, like when you're writing a document, you might say, or on the news, it'll say, DC is pondering Iran's response on the negotiations. What they really mean is the entire US government. And we have tons of spreadsheets too. So we have all these spreadsheets that will be pretty much what we want, but maybe a little messed up. And these actually are the most, in a certain way, they're the best inputs, but in another way, they're the worst. They're the best because this is very close to the kind of output we want. A list of places where the activity happened, what the sector was, like health, education, or agriculture, and how much money was given out, for instance. Notice that these are actually in currency deflation is another issue for us. These were recorded in Ugandan shillings. So we have to deflate currency years. You know, this is like Ugandan shillings in 1998, Ugandan shillings in 2002. So this deflation has to also happen. So in a certain way, they're the best kind of input we could get, but in another way, they're the worst because we don't really know about the provenance of this data. Where does it really come from? who was talking about it? What kind of document was this in? If someone just hands us a bunch of spreadsheets, it's harder to prove that that really happened. And our hope would be to say, here's the record of this project. Who gave how much money, to who, when, what it did, and here's the source that proves it. That's what we would like to say. We can't really do that with this. So it's a trade-off. So we've been talking about geocoding and activity coding. We have a huge list of place names we pulled from. We have about 550 codes that we try to describe projects in terms of what they do. And we've made a few attempts at each of these. So our automated geocoding attempts aren't so fantastic. So is this Afghanistan? This was a partner put this together for us, QCRI, that's the Qatar Computing Research Institute. So the government of Qatar said, okay, we'll help you out with this.